Cage stars as the bad lieutenant, Terence McDonough, who is injured while saving the life of a criminal in the flooded police station cell. Carrying a very painful permanent spine injury, McDonough starts on a constant supply of prescribed Vicodin, which then leads to much stronger and much less legal alternatives just to get him through the day. As his dependence becomes more fierce and his gambling debts escalate, McDonough starts working both his friends and professional enemies, including the people he's been investigating for an execution-style murder, to feed his addiction. And morality takes a back seat in the pursuit of his habits. Werner Herzog is very clear about this. Bad Lieutenant is not a remake, and I tend to agree. The basic elements of the original story are there, but the focus is very different. However, comparisons will understandably be made, and I will not be an exception. You take the name, you take the comparisons that it will inevitably provoke. This aside, how does the rather awkwardly titled Bad Lieutenant Port of Call New Orleans stand? Well, Nicolas Cage does divide audiences. More than one person I know will not see a film with him in. His ramped-up performances either engage or repel audience members in roughly equal measures. Cage's performance in Bad Lieutenant, however, is rather quiet and down by his standards. There is little of the mugging that typifies many of his outings, though he does carry a weight of character that still remains heightened above most actors. In my opinion, he just about pulls it off. The character of McDonough is in constant and fairly agonising pain, and Cage never looks comfortable throughout the film. Of course, being Cage, the role is always going to be played up, but he is actually fairly convincing as his character's sanity slips away. But maybe this isn't the performance that will change those who aren't fans of his work, but it's more in line with his best work than it is something like Face Off. The focus of this version is significantly different to the original, most notably with the original story of redemption being replaced with one of addiction. It does feel comparatively empty in this respect, as McDonough is a victim of circumstances and his family's addictive predisposition, and he is a truly bad guy, where Keitel's character was a portrait of a truly corrupt man, both morally and practically, who's spurred to redeem himself. While both are valid, the latter feels more interesting, because it's an evolution of the character, his journey from being a seemingly irredeemable, vile individual to finding some redemption through his work, where Cage's character was far less loathsome to begin with. He's simply a guy with problems that escalates. He does some desperate and some morally questionable things to feed his addiction, but ultimately sorts himself out. It feels more self-centered than the original. This is not to say it's not interesting. It is. The hallucinations he has, the depths he plumbs, and casual disregard for the law he's supposed to uphold, his relationship with his friends and family, not to mention his prostitute girlfriend. All of these things make for an interesting character and story. It all just feels a bit like it's wrapped up in his point of view rather than being a character study, which I think would have been the more satisfying option. I think it's as much to do with the problem that the good guys are generally less interesting even when they do bad things than the bad guys, but maybe this is just my point of view. Ultimately, The Bad Lieutenant Port of Call New Orleans is a pretty decent film. The characters are engaging enough and the situations make for interesting viewing, and as a standalone film it has enough to offer to make it worth a watch. The story arc does take a weird and jarring turn in the last 15 minutes or so, rather feeling like it's been wrapped up all too fast and too conveniently. I felt the film had a huge chunk cut out of it just to cut the running time down. Obviously, this version is less challenging than the original, possibly due to the main character's rewrite, and as Mark Kermode commented, it does feel more like a Nick Cage film than it does a Werner Herzog film. It's a bigger budget film that's calmed down the grubby atmosphere of the original with a more mainstream star, and it's directed with less angst than Abel Ferrara was displaying in his earlier work. But it's not bad. It's often humorous and a lot easier going than the original, which is actually quite hard to sit through. And it's fairly enjoyable. It just suffers because of the inevitable comparisons that a remake, re-envisioning, reimagining will deservedly attract.